Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to look at the work of the boss himself, Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen was born in 1949 in New Jersey, and eventually got a record deal in 1973 when he teamed up with the E Street Band, his legendary backing band with whom he's made most of his records. He's famous for his long, epic 4-hour concerts that can go even longer, into 4 days probably. I've been to many myself, and they're wonderful occasions. They're a joyous celebration of music. I think Springsteen is a really major artist. I think he's as eloquent as anybody when it comes to writing about Americana and particularly about the American dream, both the sort of darker underbelly of it and also the sort of more romantic side of things. He's made a lot of great records. He's made some not so great records. And I think, once again, with some artists, I think the best way to distill it all down is to look at the 10 best albums. And before we get going, yes, this is a homemade Bruce Springsteen t-shirt, but you probably wouldn't have guessed that. So, look, let's get into it. At number 10, from 1973, his second album, The Wild, The Innocent and the E Street Shuffle. Try saying that after a few too many Budweisers. This was Bruce's second album, and the first album, Greetings from Asbury Park, had not been a commercial success. The record company was absolutely convinced that Bruce Springsteen was going to be a star, so they threw a little bit more money at this. So this album is a little bit rockier than the first one. Asbury Park is a little bit folky, a little bit acoustic. But this wasn't a commercial success either, despite some very intricate, some ambitious songwriting. It's got Rosalita on it, which is a song that they closed their shows with for many, many years afterwards. There are a lot of familiar Bruce Springsteen themes on this album. Adolescence, dreaming of escaping your hometown, young love under the stars on a balmy night. These are all things that Bruce would come back to time and time again throughout his career. You can hear this is the sound of an artist developing in their songwriting. And I think it's a better album than Asbury Park, but we all knew that Bruce was on a journey here, and much better was still to come. It's still a good record with a killer side too. From 1982, his sixth album, Nebraska. Now, a lot of Bruce Springsteen's fans really love this album. It's got an interesting backstory, because Bruce was traveling around recording songs on a 4-track Porter studio, a little cassette recorder, just with an acoustic guitar, with a view to re-recording all these songs for his new album with the E Street Band. But when he listened to them back, he thought they had a real bleak beauty to them, and he decided to just tart them up a tiny bit with a bit of reverb, echo and stuff here, and keep the album as it was. And what a brilliant decision that was. Because this is a solemn, moody record, as reflected in the sort of bleak black and white cover. The lyrics are dark, about mass murderers and about criminals. I think some of these songs were inspired by a book he'd read called The People's History of the United States, or something like that, which is probably quite a dark book, judging by their songs. He didn't tour the album, which was very rare for him. But what I love about it is you've got that voice. I mean, Bruce Springsteen's a really great singer. Don't be under any illusions. He really is. And he can do a lot of things with his voice. And when you just frame that voice with an acoustic guitar, you can hear so many different nuances in the way he sings, and it really comes out on this record, as it does on a couple of others we're going to talk about later in this list. Nebraska, Atlantic City, Johnny 99, a lot of good songs on this record. Number 8, his fifth album from 1980, The River. Now, a lot of people are going to think this is quite low for The River, but hear me out, people. This was his first double album, and it was his first Billboard #1. There were a lot of leftovers on this album from the previous record, Darkness on the Edge of Town. And he ended up with having well over 50 to choose from, so he couldn't really pick a sort of single album from them all. He just wanted to throw a lot of things on there. This album has a sort of reflection of a hard time in the United States, recession, again, some familiar Bruce Springsteen themes. And there are some really good songs on here. You've got Independence Day, Cadillac Ranch, The Ties That Bind, Probably the most famous songs are The River, the title track, which has been a live staple for many years, and Hungry Heart. When he presented the record company with the album, they said, we don't hear a single. And he went and specifically wrote that as a single. And what a great track it is too. One of my favourite Bruce Springsteen songs. Why is this so low? I personally think and I love Bruce Springsteen, often more than the next man or woman. But I think 2 albums of Bruce Springsteen in one sitting is perhaps too hearty for me to digest. And I'm not entirely sure the quality of the songwriting stands up over 2 albums. So many double albums could be distilled into one brilliant album, and this is no different. But yeah, he does get away with the double album, but for me, has to be a little bit lower in the list. Number 7 from 1984, the big one, Born in the USA. This was his 7th album. Born in the USA, of course, with its iconic cover and it's much misunderstood title track, Born in the USA. This is one of the seminal albums of the 80s. It's one of those albums that symbolizes an era, Reagan's America and all that kind of thing. This is Bruce Springsteen as blue-collar working man. It's full of tunes. There were 7 singles from this album: Dancing in the Dark, Cover Me, Downbound Train, I'm on Fire, Born in the USA. I mean, it's almost like a greatest hits of Bruce's 80s period. It went on to sell 30 million copies. 30 million copies. Some of these songs were left over from the Nebraska sessions, so some of these are songs that he eventually did re-record fully. And this album really sort of represents a period in time. It's a strong, muscly record, and it gave birth to real heartland American rock, which people like maybe John Mellencamp and Rick Springfield, people like that, benefited from in their careers. But at number 6, a very different record from 1996, his 11th album, something of a solo record, another sort of solo acoustic record, The Ghost of Tom Joad. Now, this is a record that really falls between the cracks a lot when people talk about Bruce Springsteen's albums. This is an album he wrote influenced by the writing of John Steinbeck, particularly The Grapes of Wrath. And he was writing about the American Dust Bowl and the area of north of Mexico. And this has got this album really it didn't do that well. I mean, I think this ended his run of top 5 albums, which he'd had for about 8 consecutive albums in a row. What I love about it is, apart from it's very, very atmospheric, and I do love an album with atmosphere, and this has got it in spades, but I think again there's a real sort of lightness and softness of touch on this record. Often the E Street Band can as great as they are and as exciting as they are, they can sound like they're sort of building a shed sometimes, and that's just inherent in the way the musicians come together and the way they feel they need to be produced. So it's quite refreshing to hear Bruce in this setting, and again I talk about that voice. When it's framed by such gentle arrangements, you can really hear what a fantastic singer is. He can really belt it out. Of course he can with the E Street Band, but at the same time, there's a warmth, there's a romanticism and a lyricism in that voice that I really love when he's singing a little bit lower, a little bit breathier, a little bit and a little bit softer from the throat. The top 5. So number 5 from 2002, his 12th album, The Rising. So this was Bruce's response to 9/11. A lot of these songs were written in the wake of 9/11. Some were written before. The story goes that he was driving down the street and he stopped at a crossing, and somebody recognized him and got him to wind his window down post 9/11 in all the unpleasantness, and said, "Bruce, we need you now." And that struck a chord with him, and he went away and wrote a collection of songs inspired by 9/11. Not not graphic, obvious songs, but he was looking at the situation from point of view of community and society, and particularly in relationship contexts and social unrest. My City of Ruins, a song that sort of best reflects that. But this is what I love about this record is actually you come away with a tremendous sense of positivity and a real renewed belief in the human spirit, because there are some incredible songs in here that just really lift you up. You've got Waiting on a Sunny Day, Counting on a Miracle, and the absolutely brilliant Mary's Place. What a wonderful song that is. It's a bit of a Bruce deep cut, but if you don't know it, go and check it out. Go and check it out. Check him out doing it live. You know, if you don't feel uplifted and exhilarated listening to some of these songs, then I don't know. I certainly do. So there's a positivity and, like I say, a celebration of the human spirit, and I think this was generally regarded as quite a return to form for Springsteen after a run of not particularly exceptional records. At number 4, his most recent record, his 19th album from this year, 2019, Western Stars. This is a record very clearly inspired by songwriters like Jimmy Webb, Burt Bacharach and Glenn Campbell. You can hear the twanging guitars and all the major sevenths throughout the songs, and it has a sort of cinematic orchestral sweep in the way that the music of those writers and performers does. I love this record, and you know, I think it's easy to say that it might be a little bit forced and a little bit sort of cliched the way he's appropriated those sounds and put it onto this record, but I think the songs stand up. You've got some wonderful songs here, particularly There Goes My Miracle and The Wayfarer, Hello Sunshine. I think it's a really lovely record. It's full of melody, it's full of elegance as well. He hasn't toured it as yet, and I don't think he's going to, which is a tremendous disappointment. Perhaps over time this record may drop down in this list a little bit once I've overheard it, but it certainly hasn't yet, and I have listened to this record more than any other this year, certainly. So at number 3, from 1975, Bruce's third album, and this was the big breakthrough album, Born to Run. 6 million copies later, and people are still buying it. It's a big success on vinyl records. Vinyl still, this album. The record company by now were getting desperate because, as I said earlier, the 2 previous records, The Wild, the Innocent and Asbury Park, they hadn't sold or broken Bruce through. So they threw a lot of money at this record, and you can hear it. You can hear how much bigger this record sounds than the 2 previous ones. The sound is bigger, the band is tighter, the band is more disciplined, there's less musical meandering. So this is kind of a last-ditch effort to break him. So John Landau, the producer, pulled out all the stops. You have the iconic cover with Bruce, with black and white, with Bruce with his Telecaster, and Clarence Clemens, the famous A Street Band saxophonist. And you have some absolutely killer songs. Of course, you've got Bruce's big anthem, Born to Run, but you've also got Jungle Land and Thunder Road, 10th Avenue, Freeze Out. I mean, these are all live staples that the fans love to hear Bruce wheel out in the middle of his big 4-hour concerts. Rolling Stone called this the 18th greatest record of all time. And you know, it's whilst I may not put it that high at all, you can see why people love it. It has a real epic vista to it. The horizons of this album are much broader than he had before. You've got these lovely intros on all the songs that draw you in, and then the band kicks in. But by that time, you're hooked because you're not quite sure where the songs are going to go. But at number 2, again, a very different record I place above it, from 1987, his eighth album, Tunnel of Love. This is sort of a solo album in that he plays most of the instruments himself, and there are even some drum machines on this record. But a few of the E Street members do come in and play on bits here and there, but they don't play as a cohesive band on all the songs like they do on some other albums. This was Bruce's response to the huge success of Born in the USA. This is a much more modest record. The scope and ambition of this record is much more modest. It's his Love Gone Wrong album. This really is the sound of a man loving and losing. It was hugely successful, triple platinum, thanks in no small part to the songs Tunnel of Love and Brilliant Disguise. And what I love about this record, it really sounds effortless to me. I think, as I said before, sometimes with the E Street Band, it sounds to me like they're really having to dig the song out. They're really having to get in there with a hammer and chisel and nails and cement and just build the song. This just sounds like Bruce just sort of just ambled on by and it just sort of fell out of his pocket. You know, all these songs have a real simplicity to them. The melodies are simple, the arrangements are simple, but they're all absolutely perfect. So even despite the sort of 80s sheen and the drum machines, everything is just pitch perfect, and he's got it absolutely right. So nothing is too 80s, nothing is too shiny, nothing is too drum machiney. It's a grown-up album. It's a mature album, not overproduced, full of melodies, and again, not one that people tend to put too high up in the lists. But that's their loss. Go and check it out. I really think you'll like it. But number one from 1978, Bruce Springsteen's fourth album, Darkness on the Edge of Town. I think possibly overall this would be regarded as Bruce's finest album if you did a poll of all the sort of big Bruce Springsteen fans all over the world. And it's easy to see why. It's less commercial than Born to Run. But the songs were all recorded live in the studio, often not long after they'd been written. So there's an immediacy there. There's a freshness about everything that's going on. But that's in contrast to the kind of downbeat feel. This album is a little bit dark. It is a little bit edgy. These are songs about people who've been browbeaten down by their situations and circumstances. You've got Darkness on the Edge of Town, the title track, Badlands. It's somber, maybe a bit depressing, maybe even a little bit dangerous at times. Darkness on the Edge of Town. Well, I'm not going to go to the edge of town because there's a darkness there. And I don't mean Darkness the band. Racing in the Street is a great story song. Candy's Room is absolutely exhilarating. Another of my favourite Bruce Springsteen deep cuts with the E Street Band on absolutely cracking form. Prove It All Night. There's a really good documentary about the making of this album called The Promise, and well worth checking out if you are a Bruce Springsteen fan and you haven't seen it. This is often in the best albums of all time lists, quite high, and I think NME in 1978 made it their album of the year. So shows you how highly regarded it was at the time as well, despite not having all the massive singles and the big brouhaha around it that Born to Run had. But for me, it's essentially all the great things about Bruce Springsteen. You've got the E Street Band really gunning it on some tracks, and at the same time, you've got Bruce pulling it back and telling a wonderful story that just draws you in with his romantic lyricism. So that's my list of Bruce Springsteen's top 10 albums. He's made a lot more records. Some of them are really good, some of them not so good. He did a great album about covering Pete Seeger songs, which is well worth checking out. But because it doesn't have any Bruce songs on it, I didn't think it was right really to put it in this list. But look, let me know if you agree. I know Bruce Springsteen fans can be really fanatical, and I'm sure you're shouting at your computer at some of these rankings. But if you are, let me know and we can have a discussion about it below. But until then, please join me again very soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Records Reviewed.